Hi everyone, I'm Andrea Salmon and I'm really pleased to be back with Peter Simpson from Assistive Technology Australia. Today we're talking about gardening. In the spirit of reconciliation, MS Limited acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, and we acknowledge their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders that are with us today. And we acknowledge that I'm in Victoria and Peter's in New South Wales, so we're both on different lands today. As I said, here's Peter. Peter's been working at Assistive Technology Australia as a mentor and has done a series of sessions with us already, so we're getting to know Peter quite well. He brings a wealth of experience to the area of equipment and assistive devices that help people keep doing the things they enjoy doing. It's important for you to be aware of Assistive Technology Australia. They're a great organisation, a fabulous website where you can access lots of advice and very much a team of experts in the field of assistive technology. And they provide some training as well in that space. But keep their name front of mind if you're ever looking for equipment, because their website holds a vast array and catalogue of equipment. Not that they sell the equipment, but they advise you on the best equipment for you and your situation, and then where to get it. So today we're thinking about the impact that MS can have on gardening. And you'd all be aware that in MS, there's no two people with the same symptoms, and even the symptoms of MS fluctuate from day to day. But it's interesting when we think about some symptoms seem to be more impactful on some areas of life than others. And so in preparing for today, I've just picked out 4 areas of symptoms that I feel have an impact on MS. And you may have others that you experience, and you're very welcome to get in touch with us about those as well. But balance would be one of those areas. So if MS impacts your balance, it's going to make moving around the garden, and particularly the uneven surfaces that we often have when we're outside, that's going to make that movement even more challenging. So balance is one area we'll look at today. Another area is strength. So sometimes MS for people impacts their strength, and many of the tasks that we have to perform in the garden do require a degree of strength. So when your strength is reduced, it can make some tasks really feel impossible, but hopefully we've got some strategies to help you overcome that feeling. Dexterity is another one. Sometimes for people with MS, hand control and fine control can become impacted, and our hands don't work as well as you'd like them to. So that can impact some of the things you might be doing in the garden. And then the big one, and we'll talk about this, I'll come back and talk about this as well with you, is fatigue. We know that for so many people living with MS, fatigue is one of their worst symptoms and the one that impacts the greatest on the things that they'd like to do. It seems to get in the way of everything. But there are ways around that and ways to keep you doing the things that you want to do. So we'll look at that as well today. So Peter, I thought it'd be great if we could start with the area of balance, and wondering if you can talk us through some of the pieces of equipment or the products that might help people if they notice that their balance is reduced.
Yeah, hi Andy, yes, thank you, absolutely. And hi everybody out there. I know everyone's doing it tough in this current climate. Most people in Australia, I think, in lockdown at the moment, but I think, you know, the more things we can do to keep ourselves occupied in our own home, such as gardening, you know, I think, you know, would be good for especially for people's mental health at the moment. So let's just have a look at some. We'll look at some equipment. We'll look at some equipment today and talk about some techniques that might actually help you in the garden, especially if you're having issues, as Andrea said. So getting around your own garden. So Firstly, with balance, what I've done is I've just pulled a few different sort of products for you from our website to give you a bit of an idea, a bit of a gauge of the different types of products that are out there to assist you and what they actually do and how they can assist you. So what I've done is the first product I've pulled out is actually a pruner, an edge clipper, for example. This one, as you'll notice, is actually a long handle. So a lot of products you can get out there that may assist you. You can get with a telescopic handle, for example, or a handle that you might be able to adjust to be your own length, particularly if you have issues getting down onto the ground and standing back up again. So you might want to do a lot of these activities actually standing up and keeping yourself in an upright position. So that first product, which is, as you can see, is long-handed gardening shears. Has a long handle, and actually this particular product actually has a cutting head that rotates 90 degrees. So you can actually turn it to any specific angle that you would like. So you may not necessarily, as the lady in this picture, be cutting in a straight line, for example. So you're able to do that with this type of product. The second one, which is actually a long-handed shovel, but that particular product comes in a different range of products, whether it be a gardening fork or an actual weed puller. There's a lot of long-handled gardening tools now on the market out there. A lot of these products too are generally found at stores like Bunnings and that as well. You can get a lot of these products. I know that the Bunnings website now actually has a section on equipment for people with mobility issues. So if you search that on the Bunnings website, you'll see a lot of products that they have on their website for people with mobility issues as well. So that's a good thing to remember that you might want to have a look at.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, the gardener's needle and tool is something that a lot of people might have seen around. They're actually quite readily available on the market. Again, something else you can actually buy from most garden suppliers such as Bunnings. But this particular kneeler and stool is actually reversible. So as you can see in the picture, she's using it as a kneeler to assist her to get down on her knees, but also providing that soft support for her knees as well. And as you can see, there's also she's also got support rails on that stool as well. You can see her left hand's actually on the top of the rail. So those rails, again, can be used to actually assist yourself in standing, one hand on each side. And this particular product too, if you can actually flip it over, and those rails become legs. So now it turns into a seat. So you can use it as a kneeler or flip it over and use it as an actual seat and sit a little bit higher. So
that's great.
There's a lot of sort of products like this on the market for people to use. What I've pulled out here is a number of items to assist you sort of moving equipment around the garden. So for example, you might have a bit of a larger garden. You might be working in one specific area of the garden, for example. You know, things like, how do I get my equipment to where I'll be working for this particular period of time. So the first one, which is actually a garden seat with wheels. So this is another type of garden seat that will actually allow you to, once you're sitting on this seat, actually move yourself along the garden, for example. So if you're working on a garden that's particularly long in a straight line, you're able to shuffle yourself along if you're weeding, for example, rather than having to stand up, walk to an area of the garden and sort of sit down again. This actually has wheels and will allow you to sort of, if you're able to use your feet to sort of roll yourself further along that garden. This particular garden seat actually has storage as well. So as you can see in the rear of that seat, there's actually a little cubby hole there where you can put some equipment and things like that, and also the seat. The seat of it actually lifts up as well, and you can sort of hide some things in there. But just reminding too that the more equipment you put in something like this, the harder it may be to actually move it along So that's another thing with something like this to think about. Our next one is actually a garden tipping cart. So again, something a lot of people might have seen around the place. Essentially works as sort of a wheelbarrow sort of thing, except it has 4 wheels with a larger handle that you literally just drag it behind you around the garden. So again, you don't necessarily need to bend it down like you would a wheelbarrow to pick it up. You can just use that telescopic handle.
And being one-handed,
as you can see in the bottom picture, it works as a tip loader as well. Things
great
like
being
that.
one-handed, Peter.
Absolutely drag around one-handed. And again, it's you put as much in there as you can drag around, basically. So obviously the more you put in there, the heavier it's going to be to pull it around. So that's up to you as to what you use it for and how much you put in there at any one time. The last one I've got here is a mobile garden hose trolley reel. This is actually a question I get asked a little bit about from people, because I know for myself, being in a wheelchair, that one of the hardest things with gardening for me is actually watering the garden.
Okay.
And having to drag a hose behind you, because as we know, a hose can be known to kink and things like that, and also can also be a trip hazard too if we're unable to put it away properly when we're finished using it. So I just know for me that can sometimes be a bit of an issue. So this is just one option of something where you can actually drag around one or two handed behind you, bring the hose around with you, and just allow yourself to extend as much as the hose as you need to, rather than just having a full length hose and basically walking it around the garden and getting tangled. And this actually has a hand winder on it as well, so you're able to manually wind the hose sort of back up once you finish using it. Something like this might be good for some people, might not be good for everybody. Another issue I'm finding when we're watering the garden again is that generally the location of the tap may not always, where the hose is connected, may not always be in the best position for us in relation to the rest of the garden. And obviously this is something we can't do a lot about. So just think about options where, like, for example, I know what I do is I would generally water the garden with the hose, the garden that's closest to where the tap is. So I'm not actually winding the hose too far out and dragging it around the garden. So so I'll water the garden with the hose, everything that's within vicinity of the actual tap. And then what I'll do is I'll use something like I fill up a milk bottle or something full of water, and then I'll just wheel myself around and individually water the rest of the plants and something like that.
Terrific. That's great.
So but a lot of these sort of techniques too is I find out is by talking to my friends, my peers, people that have the similar disability to what I do, and just find out what they do.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a good way of that's a good way of working out new ideas too.
Yeah, I think you've already pointed out that everybody's so different that it's just good to know that there are options, and it's worth asking the question. So what about when we move to thinking about strength? I know you've got some gadgets, but if you could talk to us about some of the things that might be helpful when strength is an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, When it comes to strength, again, long-handled equipment can also help with strength as well, particularly when we're looking at things like having to reach for things up high, whether it be pruning a tree, for example, as we can see in this first photo. So this first photo was actually of a lightweight, long-handled pruning tool, which has a cutting head on the end of it. And the head will actually rotate as well to allow you to get to the pruning angle that you would like to be able to reach the branch or something. This particular wand also too has a trigger handle to operate, so it might be a little bit easier for somebody to operate a trigger handle, for example. And then something like this can actually be used either standing up or sitting down. If you can get something, as we spoke to about just a minute ago, with a telescopic handle, you're able to adjust the length of it to whatever length sort of will suit you as well. The second one as well, again, is another pruner, but this is a smaller pruner that you can use for low bushes and things that are sort of more sort of towards ground level. This actually has a bit of a mechanism that adds to the cutting power. So the blades are actually self-opening on this. And also this one has an ergonomic handle as well, a soft ergonomic handle as well, this particular product. If you're somebody that has tremors, for example, in their hands, or involuntary movements or something like that, you know, consideration about the safety of these sort of the products as well. You need to think about whether I need assistance or whether this is a task that I actually might want to get somebody else to help me with.
Yep.
Yeah. I know myself that, you know, I like to do what I can in the garden, but for things that I can't do, like mowing my lawn and things like that, I actually have somebody come in and do that for me. And again, a service like that, I can take out of my NDIS plan. I can use my NDIS plan for that, because it's an essential service, and it still allows me to keep doing what I'm able to do.
That's right. It's not losing control completely. It's choosing which pieces of the task that you perform.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it was a good reminder too about, you mentioned making sure that like the safety because the blades are sharp, but making sure your tools are sharp is also a great way of making sure they're as functional as possible. That helps if our strength is a bit reduced. Having a nice sharp tool is going to be more beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, not only is a sharp tool easier to use, but also the equipment will last longer as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's like any piece of equipment. If you keep it well maintained, you know, it will do its job really well and last. So just lastly, I'll just look at that that last picture, which is of the 5-piece gardening tool set. This actual particular tool set is actually available on the Bunnings website. This is just the range of products.
We aren't sponsored by Bunnings, by the way, we must say.
No, I must say that. I like to use examples, you know, places like Bunnings, because to make the point that you can get a lot of these pieces of equipment are actually mainstream.
Absolutely.
And you can actually get, they're not necessarily classed as, you know, assistive technology. It's just that they're the way that they're designed.
Yeah.
So yeah, that last tool set again is that garden set has an ergonomic handle, is very lightweight, and might be good for some people as well.
They look fabulous. And I know you've also given some thought to, you know, often our garden becomes a bit inaccessible because it's ground level, so that's a real challenge. I think you've got some alternates to show us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So alternative garden beds may be an option for people as well. You know, the good thing about these sort of things is we can lift them up off the ground. These are good for people, for example, that are wheelchair users, for example, or just for people generally that have trouble getting down to that ground level. So we've got a few different types of raised garden beds here. The first picture, which is the Birdies range of garden beds, just an example of the different size garden beds that you're able to get. When it comes to garden beds, it's sort of like, how long is a piece of string in regards to the variety and the types of garden beds that are on the market. But, just remembering that we can get them at any height that we want. So, and different design garden beds, having them at the particular height that we need is never an issue. The second photo is actually of a potting bench. So, again, this allows us to give us a preparation area off the raised garden bench as well.
That's fabulous.
So, this particular product actually attaches to the raised garden bed range in the first photo. But there's a lot of these types of potting benches on the market that will attach to different things. So whether it be a window shelf outside, or whether it be a table, for example. So a lot of these benches are really good because they will just clip onto the edge of something and will just give us a little bit more room as well. That last photo was actually of a container garden. So this is more of a hydroponic sort of a setup where we might have reduced space. Things like this are good, for example, if you live in a unit, for example, where you may not have an actual garden or space to actually do an actual garden, whereas something like a container garden you can put on your balcony, for example. And grow your vegetables or your plants sort of hydroponically.
They come with a stand as well, and they can be moved around. We have a program that will come up a little bit later called a Go for Gold scholarship program that people with MS can apply to for some funding to pursue a dream. And I actually know that a number of people use that or make that application because they're wanting to make their garden more accessible. And I've seen these veggie pod container gardens used really well for people who, as we've been talking about, have trouble with their balance or have trouble with their mobility, and getting down to the garden is not an option, but standing at a bench height works. So these pod container gardens are fabulous. And we've had some success for people applying for the Go for Gold scholarships to fund those.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, it's a good program. So what about dexterity, Peter? If we move on to thinking about some gadgets that can help if our dexterity is not as good.
Okay, so I know myself, like a lot of people, I myself have quite limited hand function, and I know how frustrating that can be sometimes when you're trying to do something and your hands don't really work properly. There's quite a lot of range of garden tools on the market with that have ergonomic handles. So that first picture is a good example of the fact that tools, we can buy gardening tools with various different shapes in handles and different materials, whether it be a harder plastic or a softer sort of handle. So, if we're somebody that has quite a particular, a weak wrist, for example, and would rather hold a tool at a specific angle, something like this might be really good for us. So, this particular garden spade has a slight circular handle, but we can also get them in a 90 degree angled handle as well. So if somebody would would rather a 90 degree angled handle to give them a little bit more wrist support, products like that are available as well, which is a good example of that is in that second picture. So those last two pictures actually go together. So the fist grip garden tool, you can either use it as a short gardening tool. So as you can see, it's actually got a right angled handle, and he's just using basically a push-pull motion. And then what will actually happen is that picture on the far right we can actually attach a longer handle to that if we want as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can also those range of handles as well will come with a cuff support as well. So
that
for
bottom
example,
part of that picture?
Yeah, so the bottom one in that picture, which is a little bit small to see, actually works a bit like
yeah, I'm thinking of like a forearm crutch when you've got the piece that wraps around your arm. That's great.
Crutch was the word I was trying to think of. Thanks for that. Yeah, absolutely. And products like this, if we can add a longer handle to it, will allow us to use it standing up as well.
Yes, that's fantastic.
So that, you know, something like that is good to reduce wrist and finger stress as well. So the next one, so when I was talking about hoses before, something that might be good for us too might be a trigger nozzle on the end of our hose. So as we know, the very old conventional hoses, you need to twist to sort of turn them on and adjust the flow. And sometimes those can be a little bit of a pain, whereas something like a trigger nozzle may actually work in your favour.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So something like a lot of the trigger nozzles too, you can actually, rather than having to hold the trigger in, you can actually lock the trigger in that on position.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is squeezing it in once and then locking it in the on position. And then it's just moving your arm around to sort of spray what you need to spray as well. Also has an added benefit of being a good water saver as well. So the second picture is actually of a soil scoop. So this one's really good. This one has an ergonomic handle, as we can see. It's got slight depressions in the bottom part of the handle, so that might be easier for somebody to sort of grip, as well as the actual scoop being a little bit more angled, so a bit more like a spoon, so we will actually hold more soil in the scoop rather than just being flat. Now the bear paws,
that looks really interesting.
Yeah, the bear paws is not actually on our website. I actually came across these when I was doing a little bit of research, and I just found them online. So again, if you're looking for them, just any of these products, just Google the product name that I put there, and all the different suppliers will pop up. So what I actually liked about this one is that it's quite easy to use by using a clawing motion to break up soil or weeds. So it's basically just gripping the handle in a fist, basically, and that's the only really finger movement that you need, and then the rest of it's using the arm.
That's great.
Forwards and backwards to break up the soil, whatever it is. So yeah, that was just something that I came across that I thought might interest some people.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some very clever gadgets out there, and as you say, it's really great talking to your friends and your colleagues or other people, for our guys, other people living with MS, just to hear about other ideas and other things that people have tried and found useful. Equally, I guess it's the other side, that they've tried and it was a disaster. So, you know, sort of rules that out.
Trial and error.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Now, the other thing we thought we'd talk about is fatigue, because we absolutely recognise that fatigue is a huge issue for people living with MS. And we've got lots of other programs that you can tap into around managing fatigue, but particularly when we think about the garden, some tips that I would suggest are on the screen here. But one is pacing. Make sure when you've got a plan around working in the garden for the day, that you pace yourself within that activity so that you build in some rest breaks. You make sure you're doing some sitting down tasks and then doing some walking around tasks so that you can pace yourself and not feel that you have to do it all really quickly. It ties in really well with that next suggestion, which is thinking about, instead of needing to complete a whole task, give yourself a time that you're going to spend doing the gardening. This is one of the strategies that we talk about in the Facets Fatigue Management Program. We tend to get caught up with thinking, I have to prune the roses today. So that means pruning all the roses. If you can switch your thinking and make that, I'm going to spend 30 minutes on pruning the roses today, and then I'll come back tomorrow and spend 30 minutes. That helps you get that pacing happening without that feeling that obligation to complete the whole task. And delegation is a huge one. We could probably spend about an hour talking just about the whole concept of delegating tasks. But Peter mentioned it before. Sometimes there are aspects of the garden that we need to delegate to someone else. We can pay for that through our NDIS package or through our aged care package. Leaving some of the activities that are the ones that we enjoy and get value out of, we can hold on to those. I know that it's a real challenge for people to feel that it's telling them that they can't do it. We've got to turn that thinking on its head and say, no, this is actually giving me back some energy to do the parts of the activity that I enjoy. I heard a great story of someone saying that for the neighbours in the street, there was this whole conversation went on about, oh, look at Mrs. Smith up the street. She must be doing well. She's got a gardener now. What they didn't realise was that the gardener was being paid for from the NDIS. So, it was kind of interesting, because the flip side of that is Mrs. Smith might have actually been really hesitant to give up the gardening, where actually for everyone else around her, they were seeing that as a real bonus, that by her having the lawns mown or the hedges clipped, it left her the energy to do the things that she wanted to do. So it's often just a different way of looking at that concept of delegating. There's also a great story about the gentleman that was struggling with his lawns and persevering to keep doing his lawns. And when he actually stopped and thought about it, he thought, I don't actually particularly even enjoy doing the lawns. I'm going to pay my nephew to come and do the lawns. I get to see my nephew, he gets some pocket money, and I don't have to do the lawns anymore. So it's kind of just a bit of spin doctoring to see if you can think of another way around delegating some tasks. And then sometimes it's about simplifying the task. Can you make the area easier to maintain? So making one area of the garden very much self-managed, that you don't have to do anything to maintain that, using mulch so that the weeds don't grow, or having bushes that don't need pruning. So thinking about that planning and simplifying the whole garden so that it might leave a smaller area that you can use for the bits that you enjoy doing. So simplifying the tasks. And then, as we've mentioned, having rest breaks, and having a rest break in the garden is probably the best thing you can do, because it's lovely to connect with nature, but it's also really important to build in those rest breaks amongst the gardening so that you're recharging your battery and able to do more in the long run. So there's lots of things that we could talk about managing fatigue, but there's just some tips. And I think Peter's got some tips on some general considerations around the garden.
Great, thanks, Andrea. So Andrew just briefly mentioned about looking at our garden as a whole and how large our garden is and how we get around it, and looking at things that we can put in place to help us getting around our actual garden. So a general path of travel is a huge consideration. So thinking about how I'm going to get to the different areas of the garden that I need to get to. So the first point I've got here is about having an unobstructed path of travel around the garden or around the yard. That might be, what parts of the garden do I need to get to work on? Do I have a clear path of travel between my back door, for example, and the parts of the garden that I need to get to. So thinking about things like, you know, not leaving equipment lying around the yard, that's probably a big one, in that, you know, I know a lot of us tend to, myself in particular, when I'm finished doing a specific task, I quite often won't put equipment away. I'll just leave them where I last used them. And then, you know, I'm pushing around the garden or something and I run over, you know. Yeah. I run over a spade or something. Like, what's that doing? Oh, that's right. I forgot to put it away. Absolutely. So, you know, things like that, you know, sort of need to think about as well. Things like unevenness and the rises can put people off balance as well. So, for example, and this is what's really good and clear about maintaining, mowing the grass. For example, keeping your grass in a manageable height. Because, for example, if you have a path, for example, anywhere in your backyard, and you're now walking from that surface of the path onto grass, for example, we want to try and keep those two surfaces as level to each other as we can. Because if the grass gets a little bit high and we're walking from the path,
absolutely, huge tripping hazard. Yeah, absolutely.
And things like walking from a slippery surface to a rougher surface as well. You know, the other things that people don't often think about as well is when it's been raining. You know, getting into our garden when it's been raining. So now the majority of our surfaces, particularly a concrete path or even a polished concrete, for example, like you would have in a garage, for example. These type of surfaces, when wet, can become very slippery and a trip hazard. So, you know, just thinking about things like that as well when we're walking around our garden and making sure that we can actually get around our garden as well. And yeah, the last one, so yeah, tools left lying around and can be a trip hazard to you and other people as well. Also to the placement of things like garden furniture as well, you know, thinking about as well. So Andrea just spoke about having rest breaks when we're performing tasks in the garden. So, you know, making sure that where our garden seat is positioned is optimal for us. For example, you know, is it somewhere where we would like to sit in our garden to get a lot of sun, or you might have a good view? And is it in a central part of the garden? So trying to have that seat in a position of the garden where no matter where I am in the garden, I can easily get to that seat or that table. So, you know, those sort of thoughts are, you know, something people might like to think about as well. Just a couple of other things we'll look at. So looking for lightweight gardening tools, you know, we can get gardening tools on the market now made of aluminium, carbon fibre or lightweight plastics. So looking for those sort of things as well might be good for us. Also using something, you know, a technique, something that's actually not all that expensive, is using padded foam, for example, around an existing handle to actually build it up and provide a bit more support for us. So we might already have a gardening tool that we like to use and we don't really want to buy a new one. So, you know, something like, you know, just putting a bit of foam around the handle or something like that to build the handle up might be a good inexpensive way for us to modify that piece of equipment so that we can use it. So that's a really good thing to think about as well. As we spoke about before, ensuring that the blades of our tools are kept sharp and are kept in good working order. So that the next time we want to use them, that we're able to do that. They will last longer. Again, something else we spoke about, having someone assist with tasks, even lay the equipment out for us, for example. So we might be able to use a piece of equipment, but we might not be able to actually get it out of where we usually store it, out of the garage or something. So we might even need somebody just to get the equipment out for us. Not actually do the task, but just prepare everything where we need it. So that's a good thing to think about as well. And also making sure that that we store our tools in a safe, secure place that is easy for us to reach or easy for us to get to, you know, if we want to be able to access our own tools and things like that. I know there's a lot of different different tool holders and things like that on the market as well, to be able to hang tools up on a wall, for example, and things like that. So storage is very important. And in relation to what I said before about, you know, that risk of not leaving tools lying around in the garden for you know, to be used as a trip hazard and things like that.
Absolutely. And it also, we know that it decreases our fatigue. So one of the things we talk about when we do our decluttering program is making sure that everything's got a place to live. And if you take things back there, it reduces the fatigue of having to look for things, having to think about where it's going to be, because you know it's always going to be back where you've decided to store it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've talked already a lot, I think, about how important it is to get advice from others. But Peter, talk to us through this slide as well about where to get advice.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we've got sort of informal support. So more like, you know, talking to our peers, as I said before, which is really good. Social media pages as well. I know that I use social media a hell of a lot. And I'm actually involved with a few actual Facebook groups. There's a lot of Facebook groups out there around, you know, the NDIS or people that have a specific interest in a specific topic, things like that. So those are really good, you know, reaching out to your support networks and people that are like-minded is generally where you get most of the advice these days, I think.
And I love the idea of the gardening clubs. That's great too, and I'm sure they are online as well now.
Absolutely. I mean, again, it was just something the other day I just did a general Google search on gardening clubs, and you wouldn't believe all of the stuff that sort of came up. Gardening clubs are everywhere. For example, I know that there's a number of whether that be a registered club, for example. There's a lot of large registered clubs around the place that will actually have like an inter-gardening club or something like that for their local area, or there might be a specific gardening club for a specific disability group or something like that. Or if there's a gap in the market, maybe somebody out there would like to start a gardening club for people with MS maybe, or even just a Facebook page or something.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, and then also we've got our formal support. So things like occupational therapists, physios, they're really good for us if we're not quite sure what type of equipment we need or that would be good for us.
Yeah.
So just remember that those formal supports are always out there for advice. And if you have any, you know, any concerns about the type of equipment you'll be using, just, you know, talk to your OT or your physio. Especially technology mentors such as myself, you know, sort of my role comes from lived experience of equipment. So again, talking about our peers, you know, advice coming from our peers as well. And then obviously we can get advice from other independent living centres such as Assistive Technology Australia and organisations as well. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And I think then we've got a comment about formal assessment. Can be really important to get an assessment, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're looking at that, sort of talking to a physio, so if you're somebody that has an issue with balance, you might feel you might want to get a balance assessment done, for example, from a physio to work out, because as we're talking about before, you know, we're talking about spreading out our energy levels when working in the garden, for example. So we might be able to get some good feedback from a physio around this sort of stuff. You know, utilising equipment that will make a task easier as well. So, you know, even though you might be happy and content using the equipment that you've got now, or your particular spade or shovel that you're using now. But you never know if there's, you know, other options out there that would make the task a little bit easier. So that's always was good to think about as well. You know, things like strength training. You know, can I build up my my fatigue levels, or can I build up my strength in able to so I'm not getting tired as quicker? Talking to occupational therapists about modifications to current pieces of equipment. As I mentioned before, you know, something like a padded, padding around a handle or something like that, or you know, a different, or getting a piece of equipment modified as well. So things like that are good to get assessment on as well.
That's great. It could actually be for some people that the things that they're noticing they're struggling with in the garden might be the prompt to go and get some of these other assessments done. And the flow-on effect for the positive of the flow-on is that it might improve your experience in a whole lot of other areas as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, there's a lot of equipment out there that we multi-use in our day-to-day life. We might use it in the kitchen as well as the garden, for example.
Yep. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about how to fund equipment, and I'm sure most people would be aware of these areas, but it doesn't hurt to remind you that the funding through NDIS can actually apply to the tasks that you want to do in the garden. When you're having your conversations about My Aged Care, you might be able to get some funding assistance to help with gardening tasks. If you're a DVA recipient, that's a great way to get some funding for equipment. And then that Go for Gold scholarship program that I talked about earlier, that's actually open right now. So depending on what time of the year you're listening to this recording, you might want to check in on the ms.org.au website and do a search for Go for Gold scholarships and see if it's the right time of year to be applying for those. But they're really to pursue a dream, and very much therefore aspects of life and things you might want to do that you can't necessarily get funded elsewhere. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about something that you would really love to be able to do. You might be able to apply for a Go for Gold scholarship. And then Peter's put together some other useful resources. We can leave that there for you to have a look at. That'll be in the handouts as well. And we really want to encourage you to contact us for more advice if you need it. Peter, was there anything there particularly that you wanted to elaborate on?
So there's a link there to our at-a-glance assistive technology guides. We actually have one specifically on gardening as well. So that might be something, I'll put a link there, that might be something too that somebody might want to have a look at. It's just a document that talks about gardening and what different types of technology out there and sort of techniques to use in the gardening as well.
That's fabulous.
A lot of equipment like this low cost equipment we can actually take directly out of our consumables and don't actually need an assessment or a report for. So that's just a link there for people to refer to as well. So
that's terrific. Thank you so much. And that reminder that we're here to be contacted. So whether you want to go straight to Assistive Technology Australia, the contact details are there, or whether you want to come through MS Connect, we're always available for phone calls and emails as well. So look, I hope that's been really helpful to you all. Peter, thank you so much for pulling together those resources. I think, as you know, it just starts the conversation, doesn't it? And it's a tip of the iceberg. If you've got an issue with any of the tasks that you would like to do during the day, ask the question, is there something that can help me? Because generally speaking, there is. There's either a different way of doing the task, or there's a gadget or a piece of assistive technology that can help you. So, you know, from an occupational therapy background, that's really what I've always been on about. We want to be able to maintain doing the things that give us value and that we enjoy doing. So let's look for other ways of doing it and be creative. Thank you, Peter, for your time today. As usual, it's been extremely informative.
Not a problem. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, everybody